It's coming this way. It is definitely coming this way.
This is not science fiction. This is science fact.
It clearly had a shape to it, and a big shape.
There's nothing to hide.
There's nothing to hide at all. Nothing to hide at all.
Went up and shot back up out over the trees. He's like he was there.
I recognized that there was a real phenomenon taking place, a physical phenomenon, and not just something in people's imagination or hallucinations. But there's a lot of crazy associated with the UFO subject, so I wanted to focus on one of the first statements I generally make is that 95% of all UFOs, sightings, radar cases, can and have been explained away in down-to-earth conventional terms. Now, having said that, that remaining 3 to 5% is what we focused on with Out of the Blue.
Late breaking. You're watching News 15 at 10.
Do these lights belong to visitors from outer space? Hundreds of people across the valley think it's a distinct possibility. Good evening, I'm Mark Bailey.
And I'm Robin Sewell. Thanks for joining us. We start tonight with those strange dots of light that were the talk of the town.
Well, you have, it's a fairly famous case, 1997, where lots of Arizonans were out under the night sky at about 8:20 p.m. to get a glimpse of the Hale-Bopp comet. This is we're talking March 13th, 1997. So it was witnessed by a lot of people.
It passed right in front of us, just about right above us.
Very large craft flies over the state. It ends up making international news. Flavie Simonton, the governor at the time, had an opportunity at that point to really break a very huge story and make a big difference in the UFO community or the reality to this phenomenon. And instead, he calls for an unscheduled press conference and has his chief of staff dressed in an alien costume and makes a joke out of the whole thing. And so that always bothered me right off the bat. But being a politician, I've always associated him as someone who's unapproachable. And I was reading an article about a year and a half ago in a local newspaper about Fife being a pastry chef, that he's no longer a politician. I thought, well, maybe now after all these years I could approach him. He revealed that not only had he launched an investigation into, finding out what this craft was, but that he too himself saw it. And being a captain in the Air Force and a pilot, he felt in his gut it was just otherworldly because of its size and the fact that it didn't make any noise. And he said it's just absolutely huge. I actually played a tape for him of one of his former constituents as well as a witness to the event, because I figured who better to put forward a question about why he did what he did than the person that suffered most from it, which was one of his constituents and a witness. And I played the tape recorder, and that sort of loosened him up, triggered some sort of response, openness, and so he divulged what he divulged to me.
I never felt that the overall situation was a matter of ridicule. We certainly took advantage of it.
And this just goes to show that you guys are entirely too serious.
Did he tell me that he got a phone call from someone in the Pentagon telling him to shut the story down? No, he didn't. Did that happen?
Who knows?
Who knows? Yeah.
140 miles north of London is Bentwaters, England. In December of 1980, a United States Air Force base armed with nuclear weapons was reportedly the site of a series of UFO encounters over a 3-day period.
There's no doubt about it. There's some type of strange flashing red light ahead. It's yellow. I saw yellow tinge in it too. Weird. It appears that he may be moving a bit this way. It's brighter than it has been. Yellow. It's coming this way. It is definitely coming this way.
Responding to reports of a possible downed aircraft, 3 patrolmen were sent out to Rendlesham Forest to investigate. Airman First Class Edward Cabanzag was one of the security officers present.
That night, we were on Security 1, which was in charge of mobile security for the Woodbridge base, and we responded to Jim Burrows' sighting of something out on the edge of the flight line.
Well, the controller on the radio broadcast over the air that go down and check out a possible UFO.
It was a bunch of security officers responsible for the security of nuclear weapons during the Cold War. So these aren't just some fuzzy-headed, touchy-feely military guys. I mean, they're very serious people. You have 3 guys approach this craft. One guy gets too scared. Cabansag decides to stay between the craft and the base and act like a relay with the radios, because there was a lot of radio interference. And then the 2 guys go out to the craft, and the whole perception of time was slightly altered. And, it was a very ethereal, sort of surreal experience for both of them.
At that point in time, 3 of us had direct observation of the craft.
The closer we would get to it, we would lose communication, with Central Security Control.
It was shaped kind of almost like a pyramid kind of shaped, just completely silent. It was warm to the touch, he said. And then, of course, he describes the symbols that were on the side of the craft. He inspected the craft, and he was there to do. And I told him, I said, that was very brave of you to walk up to this thing and touch it. Because my job was to determine whether or not it posed a threat to our base. And
it was, I say it measured probably about 9 feet long, maybe 6 feet high, a little higher, maybe 6.5 feet.
This was a up-close and personal encounter with a landed UFO. And with symbols on the craft, and I interviewed all the eyewitnesses, but listening to him do an on-the-ground investigation for 45 minutes with his logbook, which he still has to this day, the symbols on the craft, and describing how the craft lifted back off, maneuvered through the trees, and shot off at a high rate of speed, and cooperated from the deputy base commander, who's a colonel, and the 2 other men that were with him that night. That is one of the most compelling UFO stories I've ever heard. Because he touched it. It's not like he saw it or photographed it or heard about it. He actually touched it.
On March 16, 1967, Lieutenant Colonel Salas was on duty when he was contacted by his topside guard, stating that there was an unidentified object above the missile site.
By control, we advise initiating area.
Salas ordered the guard to observe and report back on any further development.
Then he called back within a few minutes and was very frightened. I could tell by his voice he was extremely agitated. He said there was an object hovering outside the front gate, a reddish-orange, oval-shaped object.
Well, there seems to be a pattern of interest in our military capabilities, nuclear capabilities. There have been a number of cases that we put forward and out of the blue where, like Malmstrom Air Force Base, where a UFO is spotted at the same time. Their Minuteman missiles go into a no-go situation to shut them down categorically one after the other.
Our missiles went into no-go condition, one after the other. Well, we lost nearly 20 missiles that morning.
So whatever is going on, it appears to have an interest. They appear to have an interest in our nuclear capabilities. And I always use the analogy, perhaps it's like someone taking the matches out of the hands of a baby or something. But that seems to be a pattern that's happened.
T-minus 15 seconds and counting. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2.
All right, there it goes.
In 1965, Gordon Cooper was the last American astronaut to go up into space alone.
What they think on it. Now, the action that I have taken is to turn off my old 5G switch fuse and my...
He orbited the planet 22 times.
When I interviewed Gordon Cooper, I actually took my father with me, Charles Fox, who's a mainstream journalist. He's written for every publication on the... And he was always very reluctant. And one of the things he said to me was that I got involved with my son's interest in UFOs with a very distinct sense of paternal obligation. In other words, initially he was thinking, oh God, I can't believe James is getting involved with this. And one of the turning points for him as a mainstream journalist, and knowing Gordon Cooper as an American icon and a hero, was sitting down in that interview and listening to him talk about, what his experience with UFOs.
He was supervising the filming of a precision landing facility for F-86 fighter jets. Suddenly, a saucer-like craft flew directly over the cameraman. 3 landing gear apparatus opened, and the object landed on the dry lake bed.
They're just typical saucer shape, double lenticular shape, metallic. And they went out, picked up their cameras, and moved on out toward him, filming. And he lifted off, put the gear back in the well, and climbed out at a very high rate of speed and disappeared.
Cooper himself saw the footage, had the footage developed, saw the footage, held it up to the light and said it was frame by frame. It was perfectly clear, in focus footage of a flying saucer sitting on the dry lake bed. Had a courier jet fly in from Washington, take the footage off to Washington, D.C., never seen from ever again. That was it. And I asked him in the film, did you ever follow up with what happened to that footage that you handed over? And it triggered, it hit a raw nerve with him, because he was always kind of composed and quiet, and he kind of fired back at me. He said, "What am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to follow up on this? You follow orders in the military, and unless you have a direct connection with there's nothing you can do." So. Did you ever keep in touch with anybody about it or discuss it?
How would I keep in touch with anybody about it? There's no way within the military or within the government of keeping track of something that is classified unless you're directly involved in it, and I was not.
Well, this is speculation on my part as to why any government would cover this information up, and I'll reiterate speculation. But I would imagine if there were structured craft of unknown origin that could penetrate very sensitive airspace and fly rings around our fastest jets with impunity, that no military who we pay them to protect us would ever want to relinquish that type of information to the general public. We can imagine them making that statement. Hey, there's these structured craft, we don't know where they come from, we have no control over them, they fly around in our secret and private airspace with impunity, and thank you and good night. I can't imagine why they would disclose that type of information.
There is a serious possibility that we are being visited and have been visited for many years by people from outer space, from other civilizations.
Since the subject is clearly of great interest to the public, I think that the scientific community owes it to the public to really pay attention to the subject and make a thorough, extensive and careful investigation.
A story this big, there's no way it can be kept secret from the public. What do you say to someone like that says that?
Well, somebody's kept it pretty secret for quite a while, anyway.
It's a very significant story, and it's a difficult story to walk away from. Once you're involved with it as much as I've been, or that you are now, it's like you recognize some truth. You speak hypothetically to people, and they all say to you categorically, wow, it would be the greatest discovery of our time. And yet, they're not willing to look at the evidence to realize that this is actually going on, and this information is being kept from us. And that, quite honestly, it pisses me off. And that's what's been a driving force behind me is that I don't think it's fair that information is kept for a select few and not shared with the world.
The discovery that we are being visited by extraterrestrials would be one of the greatest in human history. Such a discovery would profoundly alter the perception of ourselves and our place in the universe.